Okay, guys, let's roll. Hello, everyone, and welcome teachers, students, and many EF staffers. We are so glad that you've decided to join us virtually for this exciting event today in celebration of Veterans Day with our very special guest, Blackhawk Helicopter Crew Chief and 16-year veteran in the Wisconsin Army National Guard, Brian Ziegler. My name is Darby Jones, and I oversee educational partnerships for EF Explore America, and I am joined by my colleague, Sarah Shaven, who oversees loyalty and works closely with teachers from around the country. Sarah will be moderating the event today as we engage in conversation with Brian and are truly honored by his presence with us today. In advance, a huge thank you to you, Brian, for your service to this country and sharing your story with teachers and students far and wide. We are thrilled to be in an exclusive partnership with the Honor Flight Network that has afforded this opportunity, especially during this commemorative week. Veterans Day is truly a celebration to honor America's veterans for their patriotism, for their love of country, and their willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. So, Brian, we salute you. Quick reminder, although we can't see the rest of you, please submit any questions you might have over the course of the next 45 minutes into the Q&A feature. And Sarah will be keeping an eye on that in case we have time at the end or throughout to go through some of those questions. And so with that said, Sarah, I will turn this over to you and to Brian. Welcome.
Thank you, Darby, and thank you, Brian. To echo what Darby said, we're so grateful to have you here, especially this week as we honor Veterans Day, to hear your experience and get a little inside look of what life is like for our veterans. So thank you. I'd like to start by getting to know you a little bit more. Let's maybe hear, who you are, where you are, your occupation, any highlights that you have just about your home life so we can get to know Brian.
All right. I live in Waunakee, Wisconsin, which is right outside Madison, the state capital. I pretty much have lived here all my life. I'm married. I have two, they used to be young boys. I have a senior in high school and a freshman in high school. So, and they're going through all the challenges right now of school virtual, like I'm sure several of you are. My day-to-day occupation is I'm the financial controller for a manufacturing company. And so I have my CPA, my CMA, those are accreditations that you may hear out there. I've been doing that kind of work for almost 30 years. And I enjoy it quite a bit. I get to work with numbers every day. I get to also talk to a lot of people, figure out problems. So all that stuff you're learning in school does go to use in things. And I've been reminding my boys of that nature. I joined the Wisconsin Army National Guard in 1988. And I served, or how, you want me to go in just to the years, or Sarah, as to where I was at, or?
Yeah, that would be great. Where did you serve and when?
Okay.
And when did you join? Were you young?
I was 18 years old when I enlisted in July of 1988. I toyed with going active duty in the Army. I toyed with going active duty in the Navy. And I finally decided on, I still want to go to school. So I enlisted in the Wisconsin Army National Guard. Allowed me to be a part-time soldier, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer as the commercial state. Back then, there was some money for education, which was great. By the time I got out of college, Wisconsin was reimbursing me for 100% of my tuition for the semester. So that helped out quite a bit. So I was with a helicopter unit here in Madison. So I had to go to basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, which is west of St. Louis. And then I went down to Alabama for helicopter training. About 6 years into my military experience, we switched to Blackhawk helicopters, which for everyone's purpose are the ones you typically see on TV, transporting people all around. So shortly after being trained as a mechanic, I was trained as a crew chief, which basically means I'm the person that sits behind the pilots on the helicopter, and I was responsible for passengers, cargo, radio communications. I did man a machine gun. I did and a variety of other flight duties. I was part of the crew, and it was an essential part of the crew. So it was a great part-time job, because imagine working a long day, and then at night, we'd have to do additional training. So at night, after work, go there, flight briefing, get on a helicopter, and go fly at nighttime, sometimes in the dark, with night vision goggles on. And several times I would go, they're paying me to do this. And it is just like the commercials say, it is a great part-time job, and it was a lot of fun.
Cool, great, thank you. Now, what motivated you to want to join the National Guard? Is there anything in particular that drew you there?
I do have family that was in the military. My dad joined the reserves back during the Vietnam era, and he chose a reserve unit based upon the skill set he wanted to learn. He wanted to be a welder for his occupation. He had a choice between 2 reserve units, and the one he chose worked out. The other reserve unit, if he had gone there, or that one, he would have gone to Vietnam. So that was a lucky choice for my dad. And then my grandfather joined up shortly after Pearl Harbor here in the Madison area, and served from about January of 42 through almost late 45. And he was an ambulance driver, and he never talked about his experiences much. And he would only talk to me as a grandson because I served. My mom never heard the stories that I was told. But, and from what I gathered from my grandfather, and he didn't want to talk about it much, but he was in North Africa. He was in Italy. He was in on D-Day Wave 2. And when I asked him about his experiences about that, all he said was, "It was red, Brian. It was red." And that's all I'm going to talk about, he said. And then later on, after that, he went through several other engagements, including the Battle of Bulge. And my grandfather was very fluent in German back then. And he also was a translator with German prisoners of war. The war, my grandfather was one of those that did not talk about his experience. And I feel very, I've met several World War II veterans, and I feel that I didn't get that same experience, but I wouldn't want to go through what he did, knowing what I know now.
Wow, that's incredible. What an amazing experience and a tradition of service in your family. Thank you to them too. So in the National Guard, I know you guys do a lot of work both at home and of course you can be deployed. I'd love to hear about first, what it was like when you were sent overseas and what that experience felt like. What did you do there?
I've done 2 overseas deployments. So back in 2002, I went with a small group. My unit was sent there on a deployment to help provide aviation assets in the country of Kuwait. And the military has a presence there from the first Gulf War from back in the early 90s. So I was there from January of 02 through May of 02. And that was a great experience. I was with several of us chose to serve together, and we had a lot of fun when we were there because being away from home and away from family is tough. But we had some great experiences there. I flew all around all parts of Kuwait. I did get to see several parts of the country that as we joked, we got invited back in 2003 for the war. And that's a little bit of humor there. But I got notified on a Tuesday to put on alert notice that we were going to be in late January, right before the Super Bowl. On a Tuesday, we were put on alert notice. The following Monday, I got notified we were being activated. And the following Sunday, I was on federal active duty. And so within 2 weeks' time, I was put on federal active duty because of the upcoming deployment to Kuwait. I arrived in Kuwait about 2 days after the first bullets started flying. The experience there is that once we landed, got off our plane, within 30 minutes, we were getting the notification of a potential Scud attack with chemical weapons on board. What that meant was putting your chemical mask on, your chemical suits on, and running to the bunkers. And that happened several times that first night in Kuwait City. It's a very scary situation to be in, knowing that any one of those could have had chemical or nerve agents on it. So yes, that deployment there in 2003, we were there, started, we had to get our helicopters, and I made it to Baghdad. April 18th of 2003 was my first mission into Baghdad. And that ended up being almost a 7-hour flight mission with the, staying on the same helicopter, several refueling operations. We had special forces with us. We had scientists. Our mission was sensitive site exploitation, which meant we were taking scientists and special operations folks to potential chemical sites, nuclear sites. We took them to mass grave sites and other things of that nature in the Iraqi theater of operation. And once hostilities ceased, our mission changed when we set up small operation at Baghdad airport. And then we still were taking people around the country to various things. I've been to nuclear storage sites that when you listen to the news, ISIS, been to sites where they potentially still had nuclear depots there, chemical depots. I've been to their version of Los Alamos, the nuclear test site, taking scientists looking for those kind of things. But all in all, it was not a bad experience. One of the missions was we took folks to the Polish contingent who was located right outside Al-Hila, which is right next to the Babylon. And I got to walk the ruins of Babylon. And so walking and touching walls that are over 2,000 years old, we had an Iraqi professor that did that for us. So that was probably the highlight of my, getting to see something that you guys read in your history books. And I read in my history books. It's an era of history I love. Something not many people get to do. And then I did not make it home until about a week before Christmas. So I was there almost 9+ months in 2003. And there's several other stories that if you care to hear, I'd be more than glad to share.
I think we could hear another story. It's incredible to hear the diversity of all the tasks and jobs and missions that you had. It's crazy how much that there is to do there and how, it changes based on the needs. If you have another story that you want to tell, feel free. Otherwise, I do have more questions.
Maybe we can get to that later. Okay. Why don't you go ahead with some more questions and we can come back to more stories.
Great. So I'm curious, you mentioned that you joined with some of your friends, it sounds like, and I'm curious, as you mentioned, you guys are dealing with so many things that are scary or unknown or heavy topics while you're out there. And how did you lean on those guys, if they were with you, or the others that became, close to you during that time, to keep yourselves grounded and have that, mental support as well?
Well, one of the unique challenges of being in my National Guard unit was these are men and women for whom I would work with 1 week in a month and fly with, during the nights. So you really got to have a good friendship, but also a professional relationship, and you trusted each other. And that was tested when you were over there, you slept all in the same tent. We slept in a tent that had almost 50 of us in there, and you were sleeping about 2 feet apart from each other. So if you had an issue, you had to deal with it. It wasn't like you could just walk away and go back to your home. But we had several years experience. One of my best friends there was also in Vietnam. And we had about a 25-year age difference. He basically led my dad. And so his experience and his mentorship helped a lot of us out, because he had been through some really bad stuff over in Vietnam. So he helped us. A lot of great mechanics there to help ensure, our equipment was ready to fly, because we flew some long missions, and you need to have good equipment, good maintained equipment. Having a good relationship with pilots, and everything in that cockpit of that helicopter is crew coordination. And you have to all be on the same sheet of music, work together well as a team. And so when you get into experiences like getting deployed, you go back to those days in which you trained. So practice. So when it cuts the game time, well, and we had a couple experiences where I'm glad we had all that great training with us.
Sorry, I got frozen, but I'm back. Thank you. That's incredible. It's so interesting to hear how close that working relationship can be. And I'm sure you guys depend on each other just as much as, anyone else. What I would also love to know, and kind of the same thought in terms of like support and, a relationship, how did you stay in touch with your family back home, and, how do they fit into the puzzle? Because you mentioned to me before that it's just as hard, for those at home that it can be for you guys.
Yes, when we first got there, our way of communication was a military communication unit had set up portable phones. So you stood in line for about an hour, and when you got to your chance, you'd have to call home on their line. And I remember vividly the very first time I called home, it was about almost 2 weeks into being in country. And she wasn't home, because she didn't know I was going to be calling her, and she didn't have her cell phone or anything like that. So I got to leave a voice message for my wife after waiting an hour in line to call her. And of course, she was looking forward to the call. We started getting mail service, which was great. Mail call is everything that it's meant to be. Getting a letter from home from someone is great. It brings you that connection. It cures that homesickness. And as time went along, I did have the good fortune of being on an airfield, in the fact that we had internet connections, we had phones. So we could use those when we had time. They were, secured lines, so we had to make sure, not secured lines, I should say. So we had to talk. We couldn't say where we were at. We couldn't say what we were doing, things of that nature. And then some folks did buy a satellite cell phone, which then allowed you a little bit more freedom as well. So very fortunate for the levels of technology back almost 20 years ago. It did allow that pain of being away from family and friends a lot easier.
That's good. Yeah, that's fortunate that you were able to at least be in touch with them. So I'm curious about, again, your time over there. You were working with people all over the country, and I'm curious if you have any other comments on what it was like to have, you had your people that you met with back home and did your, 1 week in a month and the 2 weeks trainings and those things. But what was it like then when you had all these other people that you were part of your program?
Well, you were all there together to do a mission, and professionalism is key to all this. It's one of the things in the military you learn respect from the very beginning in basic training, your leadership and those around you. and it's critical to have that level of authority. You have to respect your leaders, and they'll respect you. I, as a sergeant, so I did have some leadership abilities or a task assigned to me, which breaks down some of those barriers and grants you a little bit more privileges versus a private or a specialist. It was great, though, to work with folks from various parts of the country. Worked well with, we've had aviation assets from Arizona that were attached to us, met military folks from Utah. So these are folks that were reservists or National Guardsmen like myself who were activated for this conflict, and getting a chance to meet them and their stories and what they do was great, but also working with active duty components. As I said before, I worked with some special operations folks. I worked with some active duty aviation assets. And it was just like, it was a very professional environment. Nobody likes being in an environment such as that, but we all had a mission to accomplish, and we did find a lot of time to have some fun. And, you know, I'll put that out there. We did have time to have fun, especially when I was up in Baghdad International Airport. Get a chance to walk around in the afternoon and meet some other units. Like I said, talk with people. And the other part then is it also gave you an opportunity to meet the Iraqi folks. And I met several of the citizens who were part of the group that were impacted from the first Gulf War. The minorities there that were oppressed by Saddam Hussein's regime, and you got to see what it did to them. And then when you hear the stories, and then they were glad that the Americans and the Allied forces were there, and what it meant to them, and what the change in their life. I met a little boy in Qasr, which is a port city just on the border of Kuwait and Iraq. He lost both his parents after the first Gulf War. And he basically was just this orphan and had been living by himself all these years, in and out of, you know, families. We would meet him when we flew into the port city. And it made you realize that you were over there doing some good too as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it'd be interesting to hear, is it a perspective shift a little bit? Because we always think about serving, you know, the people back home and protecting everyone at home. How did that shift your perspective then, getting to talk with those locals and realizing the impact that you had on them as well? I'd imagine it makes the whole thing seem a lot bigger.
It does. I mean, it was two different things. So I've met several Kuwaitis who were still very, very thankful that we drove out the Iraqis back in the 90s. I wasn't part of that conflict over there, but, you know, almost 20 years later, they're still very thankful. And then, like I said, talking with the Iraqi citizens, the ones that were very oppressed were very thankful that we were there. We were going to help them get their lifestyle back. An example of that is I met several farmers who farmed along the Tigris River. I had to try to remember my history books. There's a Tigris and Euphrates. But Saddam's forces drained the marshes. So as everyone knows, along the rivers, there's marshes, which is fertile ground. Saddam's forces would drain those marshes of the water supply for their farmlands. And so after the Allied, you know, the Americans and the British came through, they started reverting that water back to those marshes, and these farmers were able to start producing those products for which they had so many years before. It is true, it's the fertile civilization area. And just talking to them and just knowing that what we did, we drove out an evil regime and are going to make their lives better.
Yeah, it's amazing. What an impact. We have a question actually from one of the students on the call. Corinne would like to know how often you were able to see your kids and family while you were deployed. Were you able to make it back home?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I had a noise in the background.
No problem. So one of the students, Corinne, would like to know how often you were able to see your kids and family while you were deployed.
I got 2 leaves to come back. First one was I got emergency leave granted to me to come back for the birth of my first son. So that was at the end of June. So that was the first time I got to come home. My wife had gone into labor while I was gone, and it was about a 24-hour trip back home. So being there for the birth of my son was great. And then, so I got to see family and friends, obviously, during that 10-day leave. And then in September, I was allowed to take another leave to come home for my brother's wedding. And got to see family and friends, see my young born son. And then the next time I got to see family and friends was in December. Now, for everybody's here is that we didn't have what we're doing today, the Zoom meetings. We didn't have any of that video conferencing, which would have really made things easier, but talking to somebody on a phone really brought you closer to home, along with, reading letters as well and seeing pictures.
Amazing. So glad you're able to be there for those events. It's amazing. So Lexi on the call actually has a question as well. She was wondering how your experience has been with support and resources following your service. What resources are available to veterans after you come back home? And, how do you advocate for veterans' needs, and how can we also do that?
I will say this, that it was difficult to come back into regular civilian role, in the fact that I took care of a lot of the things around our household, the finances and some of the other things. And my wife had to take on those duties while I was gone. And so she obviously took on more of a role around the household. She raised our son for the first 6 months of our life and their bond. So it took a while for me to acclimate myself back into their lives. And that took almost a couple months. And then on top of that, I had to acclimate myself back into my civilian job, which that is tough to do, because when you're gone, the work didn't go away. So I had to almost act like a new employee. So the resources were there. I had family and friends that helped me. I had coworkers. One of the great things about the VA system is that they had started up with things called vet centers, which they provided counseling. They provided, because I was fortunate. I did have several of my fellow men and women that I served with who did have family disputes. It was not as easy for them to get acclimate, come home together. So the vet center and the VA provided resources for some of my fellow guardsmen that I was with. I actually had a guardsman who had to go home early because it was so difficult on his family. He got emergency discharge for that. But and the resources are even better today than they were back then.
I'm glad they're improving, and I think it's important to have support when you get home. So we have another question from one of the classes on the call. They're interested to know what your rank was and how old your son is now. Did you say he was 17, the one that was born there?
Yes.
While you were there?
So he just turned 17 back in June, and he's doing well. He's getting ready to graduate. And I was a sergeant, which is an E5 rank. And sergeant is probably one of the most common ranks out there. As I said, I had enough leadership, but then I didn't have. So it was a good rank to have. I'll tell you this though, still being a sergeant and working around 4-star generals, 3-star generals, you're still in awe. And I worked around several of those as far as passengers on my helicopter.
Thank you. So there's another question from one of the students. Luell was wondering how long it took you to become a crew chief.
You have to go through an aviation MOS, which is skill training. And that takes about 12 weeks of training to do that. And then in order to go on flight status, you have to pass a flight physical. And the training itself, it takes about 2 to 3 months. And at the end of my career in the military, I ended up being one of those flight instructors. So I was training other crew chiefs to become crew chiefs, and also to evaluate, because every year you had to go through an annual proficiency exam, which was an oral exam, a written exam, and a performance exam. You had to be hands-on and show exactly what you could do. So, and part of that for flying purposes was about 20 to 30 hours easily for the training purposes. And there's different stages. You could be day qualified, you could be day and night, and the nighttime was unaided. And then, as I said, I was night vision goggle trained. And by the time I got out of the military, I had almost 800 flight hours with me, and almost 600 of those were underneath night vision goggles. And that is probably the most dangerous type flying you could be doing. And we got to be really good at it.
Wow, it's a lot of training. That's incredible. One more question. So I'm curious, obviously there's a lot of skills that you learn, like you just mentioned, for your role in the military, but what do you think, outside of that, maybe are some things that you learned in the Guard that are valuable for your professional life or personal life back home? Like, what lessons did you take with you that are still part of your life now?
First and foremost, leadership. Right now, I'll be very honest, I could not do what I'm doing in honor flight at Badger Honor Flight, being over in charge of Badger Honor Flight for so many years, or being on the national board, without the leadership I learned in the military. I learned how to include others in missions, because it takes a team to accomplish the mission. It takes, how do you get folks to work together? How do you know where your place is in all this? I learned how to be assertive. I learned how to listen well. All those great skills. So that worked well with not only honor flight, but also in my professional career, because I have advanced significantly over the years since when I came home from there too. In discipline, organizational, what is important, and teamwork. So learning all those skill sets in the military translated very well into my professional and my volunteer life.
Amazing. So I would love, we have maybe 10 minutes left. I'd love to hear maybe another one of the stories you had mentioned, and then I have just, I think, 1 or 2 more questions for you after that, if we have time.
Well, I got 2 quick ones. One is on my way we had to take our helicopters from Wisconsin all the way to Charleston, Carolina, to be taken apart and put on a ship to be taken overseas. And I was just reminiscing this yesterday with the pilot on Veterans Day. We were going, and one of my pilots lost sight of the first aircraft and let go of the controls. And our helicopter basically turned upside down. And helicopters normally don't do that. So I was told this by the helicopter and trail, and the one pilot I was talking with yesterday is the one who gained control of the helicopter and turned us upside down and got us landed. And that was probably the scariest moment I have ever been in a helicopter. It's probably the closest I've ever come to crashing. So that was even before I left the States. And then overseas, another one of those missions that I'm very proud to be on because it just was a different experience is, as I said, the Kuwaitis were very thankful. After the war, there's over 600 of the Kuwaiti citizens that were taken by the Iraqi forces after the first war, and we're still missing. Shortly after the Marines came through, this shepherd, and if you guys can just imagine, it's just desert. He saw the Marines. He told them after the first war, he remember seeing busloads of folks going out into the desert. And they left empty. So he pointed the Marines in the vicinity of where they were at. The Marines did some digging, and this is where we found one of the first of several grave sites. And if any of you guys have learned in your history classes about the Holocaust, what happened in Europe during World War II, this was very similar to that, looking at a mass grave site. And what we had done was taken a Kuwaiti scientist with us because they thought possibly it was some of their citizens. And it ended up being the size of a football field, is the size of this mass grave site when it was all said and done. And it ended up being Iraqi citizens for whom Saddam Hussein's forces executed because they rose up against him after the first war. And knowing that I didn't directly, but I was hoping that I could bring closure to some Kuwaiti families, but indirectly we brought closure to Iraqi families, knowing that they had family members that were missing for so many years. And we brought one of those bodies with us back to Kuwait for forensic testing. And it's a very somber, but it also takes you and says what life is like and the evil that is out there and what goes on in these other countries, and makes you appreciate the great things we have in America, that these kind of things don't happen here. And it's those moments like that that made me glad that I was in the military and the things that I did.
Wow, that's incredible. You're right, it's such a great reminder of the privilege and opportunity that we have here to live the way that we do. One last question I would love to have you answer, especially having heard those stories and the things that you've seen and experienced. What advice, given everything that you've witnessed and been a part of, do you have for the young people and the students now that you've learned through your experience in the military?
The military isn't for everyone. However, it will provide for you what you want out of it. If you work hard, it will give you good life skills, good life lessons, lifetime friends. And as you guys are aware, I joined the National Guard, and the National Guard enabled me to learn a lot of skills from the military, which I said helped me throughout life, but it also provides money that I needed for education. And it allowed me, when I left college, to pretty much be debt-free. And in today's world, that's not the norm. Now, granted, I graduated almost 30 years ago, but I walked away with almost no debt, and which is great. And monies are better for now for you folks if you decide that's what you want to do when you get to that level. And my oldest is going to go to trade school. Same thing. Doesn't matter if you're going to trade school or college. Joining a part-time with the reserves or the National Guard will help you out. And it's a great opportunity to help your community as well. You don't have to go overseas to help out. I've done stateside or missions. I've had fellow folks that have helped fight forest fires in California. Folks help out with the hurricane relief down in the Gulf area, help out with polling, helping with the elections. it's a great way to help out your community as well.
Amazing. It's a really important job, and we're thankful for you and the others that do it and, you know, play their role in helping us both here and afar. Any parting words before we wrap up, or anything else that you'd like to say before we end our session?
No, I just want to say thank you to everyone today that took the time to listen to me talk a little bit about my life in the military, and it's been a very important part of my life. It's part of my identity. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Well, Brian, I can't tell you how grateful we are to spend this time with you and hear your story. I think it's important to know, you know, the experiences that you and other veterans have, and also how unique it can be, your experience, you know, at home and away, and how it's been very different than some of the other stories that we've heard as well. There's a lot to learn and there's a lot to take away, and we're grateful for you spending this time with us and sharing some of those lessons. So thank you, and thank you for your service, and happy Veterans Day. And I'll ask Darby if you have anything to add before we end today.
Yeah, Brian, you know, I echo that. Thank you so much. Happy Veterans Day. Of course, we are grateful for your service and your role on the Honor Flight Network. You know, this is such meaningful work for us to connect veterans like you to American youth and students and teachers all over the country. So thank you for your part in that. And thanks to everyone at home as well, and in schools around the country for tuning in and being part of this experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you for everything you guys are doing.
Our pleasure. All right. Okay, we'll sign off. Happy Veterans Day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.